So that just needs a few more seconds to load, and then we will be ready to go. By the way, Dr. Sommers, I'm Kobe. I've been emailing you.
You what?
I'm Kobe, the one that's been emailing you.
Yes,
and then
hi.
That's Emma, who's our outreach director.
I'm just getting a Kleenex. I managed to scrape my finger. Okay. It was bleeding.
Oh.
Like a paper cut. I don't know how that happened.
That's not good. Do you need a minute or?
No, I'm fine.
Okay.
It's nothing.
Okay. So I believe we can get started now. I think everybody can hear. We have over 100 people on right now, it looks like, who are
That's exciting.
listening. So we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kobe Rizek, and I'm the president of the Buckley program. I also want to introduce everyone to Emma Miller, our outreach director, who will be moderating this event with me. Welcome to this Zoom lecture titled What's Right and Badly Wrong with Feminism with Dr. Christina Hoff Sommers of the American Enterprise Institute. Before we introduce Dr. Sommers formally, we want to say a few words about the Buckley program for everyone who's online. First, for those who may not know, the William F. Buckley Jr. program at Yale is an organization dedicated to promoting intellectual diversity and open political discussion on campus. We do so in a variety of ways, including hosting lectures like this one, dinner seminars, firing line debates, as well as an annual conference. Our over 300 Buckley Fellows have a wide range of political beliefs, but they all stand united against the formation of a liberal-only echo chamber on campus. By providing Yale students with a forum to engage meaningfully with serious conservative thought, the Buckley program forwards its mission of a more open and more representative political atmosphere. Especially at a university where the mission is the cultivation and creation of new knowledge, Buckley Fellows believe that all perspectives, including those of the right, must be heard and examined in good faith. You can learn more about the program and how to become a Buckley Fellow on our website, buckleyprogram.com. All Yale undergraduate and graduate students are eligible to become fellows, and if you're a current fellow, please share this opportunity with your peers. This lecture is also, I'd like to say, the debut of our new What I Would Have Said lecture series, held in a similar spirit as our annual Disinvitation Dinner. This online series will provide a platform for speakers who've been disinvited or disrupted. We are thrilled that Dr. Sommers has agreed to be our first guest in this new initiative. Our second guest in this series, Josh Blackman of South Texas College of Law, will explore the Constitution in the time of coronavirus on Monday, May 11th at 4:30 p.m. Eastern. So be sure to mark your calendars for that event as well.
Now on to Dr. Sommers. Christina Hoff Sommers is a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, where she studies the politics of gender and feminism, as well as free expression, due process, and the preservation of liberty in the academy. Before joining AEI, Dr. Sommers was a philosophy professor at Clark University. She is best known for her defense of classical liberal feminism and her critique of gender feminism. Her books include Freedom Feminism, Its Surprising History and Why It Matters Today, One Nation Under Therapy, co-authored with Sally Satel, The War Against Boys, which was named a New York Times Notable Book of the Year in 2001, and Who Stole Feminism? Her textbook, Vice and Virtue in Everyday Life, currently in its 9th edition, is a bestseller for college ethics courses. Her writings have appeared in publications such as The Atlantic, The New York Times, and The Washington Post. In addition to frequent radio and television appearances, Dr. Sommers is the host of the popular video blog, The Factual Feminist. Dr. Sommers has a PhD in philosophy from Brandeis University and a BA from New York University. We will allot the first 20 minutes this afternoon to Dr. Sommers to give a brief lecture and then move right into questions. If you wish to ask a question, please submit it in writing using the Q&A feature on Zoom. If you are unable to do this, please use the raise hand feature and we will unmute you and allow you to ask your question yourself. But we do prefer that questions be submitted in writing to save time. We will do our best to end the event at 5:30 p.m. as scheduled. With that, please join me in warmly welcoming Dr. Christina Hoff Sommers to the Buckley program. Dr. Sommers, you may begin when you're ready.
Oh, it's wonderful to be here. And I'm a great fan of the Buckley program. And I think it's kind of nice that we're doing this. The one good thing about doing this online is that there won't be any protesters. Unless, I don't know, maybe there'll be those Zoom bombers from, we'll have Zoom bombers coming in from Antifa or something. No, I'm kidding. But I'm very happy to be here. And yes, my topic is what is right and badly wrong with feminism. And I will speak for 20 minutes. I'm going to even time myself. Let me just get this on here. Okay. And when this goes off, I promise to subside because too many speakers just go on and on and on, and I'm one of them. So I will stop. What is right? What is wrong with feminism? What is right about feminism? To me, that's easy. Feminism liberated women. The emancipation of women is one of the great achievements, one of the glories of Western civilization. Women organized, they fought for, and they won equality before the law. And, this involved, winning the vote in the first wave of feminism in the 19th century. And then later in the mid 20th century, the great second wave of feminism came in, and we fought and won for more fundamental freedoms against discrimination in education and the workplace. The work of feminism isn't over, but by any reasonable standard, it's been a great success story. So I guess what's great about feminism, it's critical. It's a critical chapter in the history of the human quest for freedom. But now, here's where things go a little bit wrong. If you Google a poll, just like the latest poll, and ask, the pollsters asked, do you consider yourself a feminist? Relatively few people will say yes. I have one here that I just found today. It's typical. This is a National Geographic Ipsos survey of 1,000 American women. They found that only 29% of respondents identified as a feminist and 69% did not. Now, many feminists are familiar with this. If they find it very frustrating, because people, if you ask them, do you believe in equality? They will say yes. Then why don't they call themselves feminists? Well, I have an answer to that, I think. But actually, pollsters have asked people, if you say you believe in equality, why don't you call yourself a feminist? And the number one answer people give is that feminism has become too extreme. And the second answer is the current wave of feminism does not represent feminism at its best. And there are many, many different styles of feminism. I'm not implicating them all. As I said, there's this history of sort of liberal equality feminism that I celebrate, identify with, and proudly promote. But that's not the dominant style. And I think when people are queried about it by pollsters, they don't want to be identified with it because of this increased radicalism. And so in my writings, I have tried to distinguish between two general approaches or general schools of feminism: equity feminism versus gender feminism. Now, I have always been, as I said, a strong supporter of equity feminism. And an equity feminism is someone who wants for women what she wants for everyone: just basic opportunity, dignity, liberty. The great equity feminists of our tradition, it would go back to beginning, I guess, Mary Wollstonecraft in the 18th century on through John Stuart Mill and Harriet Taylor in the 19th, and then the suffrage movement and the first wave of feminism here with Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony and Sojourner Truth and on and on. It was equity feminism, equality feminism that informed the first wave of feminism and the second wave that secured women basic rights. I don't know why I'm coughing. 1 second. And it was, in my view, it was equity feminism, as I said, has liberated women. There's still work to be done, but overall, as I keep saying, it's been quite successful. However, equity feminism has never been that popular in the academy. And increasingly, it's not that popular on social media, in journalism, in Hollywood. The style of feminism that's eclipsing equality feminism. Ah, there's Izzy. I have a device. You can just, if you have a dog that barks, so it makes a high-pitched sound. She can't stand it. It doesn't hurt. It's not an electric shock. It's just a sound, I swear. But it works. Anyway, that could be helpful during a pandemic and with a dog. Anyway, gender feminists are, they're not, it's not just that they're more radical. They take a fundamentally different view of society. And they think, look, we've had a few thousand years of patriarchy. We're not going to be able to overthrow it with some new laws and changing some attitudes and raising some consciousness. It's so deeply entrenched that all institutions bear the impress of patriarchy, the religions and language itself, our literary tradition, everything bears the mark of patriarchy, and women are still carrying the burden of male supremacy. And so they will typically dismiss my style of feminism. They'll call it I'm checking my time here just a minute. They'll call it the add women and stir method. It just won't work. And so they basically don't think we can achieve liberation when everything about women, our identities, our desires, our thoughts, these were constructed under conditions of male supremacy. And unlike equity feminism, gender feminism doesn't have a special allegiance to liberal democratic principles. So equity feminism just comes out of the European Enlightenment and the US Constitution. I mean, Susan B. Anthony had her consciousness raised by reading, the Declaration of Independence and the US Constitution, whereas gender feminism is more allied with the Marxist tradition and postmodernism and critical race theory. And this theory is, so it's not particularly interested in protecting values that are sacrosanct to liberals, of freedom of speech, due process, presumption of innocence and so forth. They will interrogate those and say, these were the product of a male dominant society, and maybe they don't serve women. And so there's no tendency to want to preserve the liberal tradition. And this bothers me a lot as an equity feminism, because I still think it's the best tradition of all. And that it's never clear what they're going to replace these with. What are they suggesting if equity feminism is faulted because it's inadequate? I guess it's inadequate. I always think of this quote, wrongly attributed to Winston Churchill, but worth quoting all the same, that democracy is the worst form of government except for all the rest. And that's what I think of equity feminism. It's the worst form of feminism except for all the rest, because all of the rest are sort of utopian and they want to overthrow for what? And what are they going to replace it with? Every shred of evidence. So this is what happens in the women's studies textbooks. If you're a college student, you're at Yale, you take an intro course and you read the history of feminism, typically, Yale could be the honorable example, but typically students will read about my style of feminism. It's usually called liberal feminism. And then it's dismissed as a relic of a discredited past and superseded by various forms of feminism. There's so many. There's socialist, there's ecofeminism, Marxist feminism, Freudian, post-colonial, Black feminism, intersectional. Well, intersectional feminism can be, there's a liberal and a radical versions, but on the campus, you mainly get the radical version. And this presentation in the textbooks typically come along with a lot of very disturbing facts about how oppressed women are under patriarchy today. So it almost looks as though we've made very little progress, that a liberal feminist like me was just naive to think women were going to advance in this society. And what bothers me is that in these textbooks, a liberal feminist like me never has a chance to respond. They just move on as if it's over. And I don't think it's over. I think that liberal feminism is still, as I said, the best, the worst, but the best we have. And by the way, the feminist theory textbooks, go to great lengths to warn us about all the dangers of liberalism and how it's failed us. And I never have seen a word about how Marxist schemes have failed people and failed to liberate women. They are very, very critical of this precious democratic liberal humanist tradition, and just really, casually dismiss free markets and academic freedom and due process and democratic compromise. Anyway, if you ask gender feminists, like, why does this appeal to you? Why don't you just kind of go with the liberal feminism where you make changes piecemeal and you do it through changing laws and, just why do you want this systemic change and why are you so hostile? And they will tell you that life under patriarchy is dangerous for women, and they have all sorts of statistics to back this up. And in fact, if you read them, I can see why young women taking a course and they come in and learn, it's in their books and now increasingly in the media, that women are cheated out of, almost a third of their salary. 1 in 3 are battered, 1 in 4 raped, that, we're massive numbers of women suffering from eating disorders caused by patriarchal standards of beauty, desperate efforts to meet patriarchal standards of beauty, the male gaze, the objectification. And that's, just if we're not already dead from being neglected or abused in medical experiments and on and on. And from way back, I just started to check the sources and to see if any of this was true. And I don't say there are some good studies in these textbooks, but overall, it's a lot of propaganda. I find exaggeration, overstatement, hyperbole. And so I started a series a few years ago called The Factual Feminist. And every week I just take a claim like the wage gap, or like the claim we live in a rape culture, or that women are tyrannized on social media by male predators and so forth. And I try to find the best evidence I can that people would recognize as these are, the most responsible scholars or statisticians. And then I correct the myth. And when I started to do it, I was doing it once a week. And my late mother said to me, "You're doing this every week. How many myths can there be?" And the truth is, I could do this for years because we really have 30 years of scholarship that is, well, I mean, some of it is reasonable, but a lot of it isn't. Some of it is true, but much of it isn't. We don't know. It's a mess. Now, the good news for those of you out there in captivity in your homes with nothing to do, there's a huge amount of work to do for women and young men, just correcting this record. Because you know what? Myths, twisted theories, fake statistics, they don't solve problems. They don't advance culture. They just create, it's just crying wolf, I feel, all the time. And I have to say it, at the heart of contemporary feminism is just a body of egregiously false information. Now, let me just see here. Oh, maybe this, I have 4 minutes. Is that right? Okay. And by the way, I won't go into it now because I've said this enough, but it's true that, take a concept like male privilege, it's true that there are many ways in which men have privileges in the society, more than women. But on the other hand, there are many privileges that women have. And another thing that worries me about the typical presentation of women's status in society in a gender studies class, or increasingly in the New York Times and on social media, is there's very little attention to the way in which men have it harder. So we hear on and on about the wage gap, which I think is poorly understood. I don't think it's because of discrimination. It's much more complex than just unscrupulous men cheating women out of their salary. So that's poorly understood. But you know what else is poorly understood is what they will do in a typical presentation, this narrative of female oppression, is they will look at, Fortune 500s and say, it's so few women, our CEOs of Fortune 500s. And, they're right. And as an equity feminist, I want to see more. However, that's looking at the pinnacle of success. You're looking at the people that the highest possible, a CEO of a Fortune 500. And that's true, the men are ahead of the women there. But then look at the whole society and look who has the dangerous, gritty, hideous jobs with high fatalities. Most of the workplace fatalities are suffered by men. Men commit suicide more. Men are more likely to be living on the street. If you wanted to, if you were a men's rights activist, you could do the same thing. But the men's right, I'm glad they're not doing it, because we don't need more of this. What we need is objective scholarship, or you don't even have to have that, just have a department. If you have a gender studies department, have a range of people so you sort of cancel out one another's biases. And I don't pretend to have all the answers, but I will tell you, it looks to me as if modern life is just a complicated mix of burdens and benefits for each sex. And as I said, men enjoy some distinct advantages. Women, we are, way ahead of men in school, or, we surpassed them years ago in colleges, first with BAs, then with MAs, now PhDs. We earn more. Men are the have-nots in education, and just there's a huge cohort of young men who have dropped out of the, not young and middle-aged young men. And economists are now wondering, are they going to find a place for themselves in an information economy? So people like Hannah Rosen wrote a book called Are Men Finished? So I think that we need an equity feminist movement is concerned with equality and equality of opportunity and basic fairness, and it's capacious enough to accommodate the problems of men. But gender feminism is so invested in women as oppressed, and even the intersectional versions, the radical intersectional, it's all about how women are oppressed in various ways depending on their identities, and too little attention to men and their problems. And the final thing I'll say is, I don't pretend to have the final word on these issues like the wage gap or domestic violence and rape and all that, but I will say the more objective scholarship does not support the thesis of oppression or women living in, under a patriarchy. That's just, it's unsustainable. And you have to buy into this distorted worldview to take these things seriously. And what I'm wondering now is, how did this happen? And how could so many people take it seriously? And then it leads me to doubt myself. I think, sorry, I still have a few more minutes. Maybe some of my critics say, well, you've internalized the patriarchy. And I worry about that. I think maybe I have. But then a new study will come along claiming widespread misery and oppression of women. And I look and I see the obvious mistakes, and they never seem to want to tell a complicated story. They want to tell a simple story. And life isn't like that. It's not like that for men. It's not like that for women. And most women, I think, want their freedom, their opportunity, their rights. But they don't think we want a gender war. But as they say, in every war, the first casualty is truth. And there are gender war feminists who are, for whatever reason, fighting this war for many years. And I don't think that the information they offer is reliable, but they have a monopoly on the knowledge base in the universities, in the women's centers, and increasingly in the society at large. A wise person once said that nobody's ever going to win the battle of the sexes. There'll be too much fraternizing with the enemy. Well, I think that's right. There will be fraternization or sororitization. But the main thing is, it's a battle nobody can win. Men and women need each other. We rise and fall together. And instead of a gender war, as an equity feminist, I recommend gender peace. And I urge everyone listening to embrace the reasonable and fair-minded equity feminism, and to be very careful of her less rational but very alluring sister, gender feminism. So thank you. And now I will take questions. I mean, did I make it in 18 minutes?
Yes, that was great. And I think I second everybody else here when I say thank you for those comments. It's very interesting to hear your thoughts. So for our first question, I'm wondering, it's very easy to picture the American workplace and use it as sort of a test to see how, these feminist goals we have are playing out and how it's working. What sort of rating would you give the American workplace in terms of accomplishing your version of feminism's goals? And then sort of what changes do you think the more radical feminists want to see that you think would have actually bad effects and would not be positive things we should work to implement?
Well, the first thing is anybody that's promoting the overthrow of the free market, thinks we have to overthrow, what is it? A feminist I kind of like, but Bell Hooks she is constantly saying we have to overthrow patriarchy, capitalism, white supremacy. Capitalism? We're going to overthrow capitalism? Capitalism it's just a word for economic freedom. And it was the free market system that liberated women. So, and women are faring very well. It's a kind of envy of women in the more socialist countries in Europe. They have more benefits, and a lot of American women would like to have those, and I might be in favor of having them. But those benefits do not close the wage gap, and they do not advance women in, launch them into high-powered careers. It's called the Nordic paradox, and there's a lot of scholarship that the more benefits you give women, the more they are sort of withdraw from the workplace. They don't do what people think they do. But anyway, having said that, what I would like to see, if we had, what we've had is for about 30 years, a women's movement obsessed with this wage gap and attributing it to discrimination. And I just think it was a waste of time because it was not caused by discrimination. And even feminist scholars know that by now. And we should have been looked at where women are and what would help them. And there's not a one size fits all, because there are women who are high-powered careers. The best data I've seen came from people like Catherine Hakim. She used to be at the London School of Economics. She studied women in Western Europe, and she identified three groups. She said about 20% of women are careerists. They want to work full-time, not drop out at any time to raise a family. Then about 20% want to be full-time housewives. 60% she calls adaptives. They go in and out. If you look at the Pew research, every few years they do interviews with mothers and fathers and what you want. They find about the same thing. Now, wouldn't it be nice to have a women's movement that would try to help women achieve those goals? There might be women who want to be homemakers, women who want to work part-time, but all they do is look at disparities and assume that all the disparities, if there are more men working, as petroleum engineers, which is very high paying, by the way, they say it's discrimination, that somehow we've kept women out. It never occurs to them maybe women are interested in other things. On average, the pool of women who want to be petroleum engineers is just smaller than the pool of men. And the pool of women who want to be, women are surging in fields like psychology and biology, but still a lot of women enjoy education, social work. So if I were in charge or I had policies, I wouldn't assume that all disparities were the result of discrimination. I wouldn't rule it out. I'm enough of an equity feminist. I'm always happy when I find out, women have broken through and suddenly we have a women, I don't know, bullfighter. I read I don't really want women bullfighters. It's too cruel to the bulls. Race car drivers, and I'm always happy about that. But we have a women's movement that seems to think unless it's statistical parity, it's discrimination. And I think there could be other reasons. So I would factor that into my policies. I hope that answered the question.
Yes, thank you, Doctor. The next one we had was from one of our online attendees. Their question is, what is your take on the 2016 and 2020 presidential campaigns and the widespread view that female candidates were not treated fairly?
What, the 2016, oh, and the primary.
Right.
Well, I am a registered Democrat, a self-hating Democrat, but my parents were very, very liberal. They were socialist. They were communist, I think. I don't know. But I can't, out of just a family, leave this party. But so I was not happy with the result of the election, but I just don't think it's the result of sexism, either one. If you look, many women voted for President Trump. It looks to me, and Hillary Clinton got the majority of votes. It looks as though her campaign messed up by failing to go to the Rust Belt. It's not a, it was unfortunate, I think, what happened, but here we are. Now, in the primary, Elizabeth Warren, people are saying it's sexist. I read today, someone said, that North Korea is going to have a woman, leader before us. Isn't that ironic? I say, no, it's not ironic. That's a dictatorship. You can get women leaders very easily if you have a completely corrupt society with no freedom, and then you just put your family members in. So that's how that worked. Or you put it's just nepotism. But with Elizabeth Warren, she was ahead. It was hers to lose, but she ran a bad campaign. And she, for whatever reason, she decided to, instead of occupying the center, which is what people want, they want it so desperately, we're going to take Joe Biden. So that was there for the taking. But she decided to go and compete for the far left with Bernie Sanders, and it turned people off. I watched my own family. You can't be more liberal than my family. And they ended up preferring Bernie Sanders to her, but she could have had their vote. So I don't see how that's sexist. I think it was just women, like men, sometimes run bad campaigns. And I'll add a third thing. Everyone should look at the work of Jennifer Lawless. She used to be at, I think, either American or, she was at maybe George Washington. I can't remember. Jennifer Lawless done a lot of studies. She's one of the leading researchers on bias against women in politics. And what she and her team have found is that when women run, they win. Their rate of winning is not that different from men. The prejudice, the thing, it's not demonstrably worse for women. It's men get all sorts of attacks. So do women. The big problem is persuading women to run. When they run, their likelihood of winning, their rates of winning are equal to those of men. It's hard. The pool of women who want to run is smaller. Now, I think that's changing. And I think that's probably the real result of 2016 is so many women were just horrified by the result that they now were running. So I think we're going to see probably in politics, it's something women clearly do well at, want to do. And I think it's a field that there's no reason why women won't surpass men, maybe, or at least, I see parity coming. It just took a while to figure it all out, and for women to really create a base for themselves. But another thing is, I think it's Georgetown University. It's their Center for Women in Politics, and they actually have training that they give to young women to enter politics. And I think it's great because the real problem was just young women didn't think of it. So now they do. Anyway, hope that answered the question.
Thank you. Yes.
So for our next question, there's a few people asking about this in the chat, but what do you think is the role of artists, filmmakers, and artistic people to create a new wave of a more healthy feminism, or to portray more well-balanced views of the issue? And I think in particular, people may be interested to hear if you have any thoughts on Fox's new series about Phyllis Schlafly and the Equal Rights Amendment, and what that contributes to this conversation.
Oh, I pray that the artists and the poets, the novelists will realize that something is wrong, and we will just have a renaissance of sanity, because things have gone crazy. I mean, this gender feminism, it makes people unhappy, makes them angry. And the bad thing about this is that these great human rights movements, if you go back to the civil rights movement, the gay rights movement, those were about, um, they were inclusive, and they were saying that they were looking for our common humanity. Whereas I think that fanatical movements don't want common humanity, they want a common enemy. And for too many gender feminists, they're identifying men and toxic masculinity and the male gaze and male mansplaining, manspreading, all of that, men, men, men. And they have a common enemy. Men aren't our enemy. And artists have to know that and should be expressing it. And I think, for so long we've had all this protest, angry art about the evils of the patriarchy. What patriarchy? It's not here. And an artist might be in touch with, just a higher reality. I hope that we begin to see an outpouring of, poetry and paintings and things that celebrate men and women coming together, the friendship. That's the revolution that is actually happening, and we should be able to acknowledge it. That I think right now, men and women have never been more equal. Each have problems. We should attend to those and care about those. But there's a feminist philosopher. I won't name her name, but her name is Kate Mann, and she's at Cornell, and she's so addicted to this language of oppression and misogyny that even caring about a man's problem, she calls, I can't even say the word, himpathy. So instead of sympathy. So all of these neologisms, those got to stop. And I can't believe that writers, we need a Tom Wolfe, but we need Thomasina Wolfe, some woman to come along, it could be a man, it could be anybody. It's just this situation right now, well, assuming we get through this pandemic, that sort of put everything on hold. But now you have time, it's a pandemic. So write that novel and, read George Orwell or read, I don't know, any of the great satirists, because what's been going on with gender is just worthy of satire. But also, I think we need artists to give a statement to just something wonderful that's happening in terms of human achievement, and in this case, the equality of men and women.
Thank you, Dr. Sommers. I'm going to ask another from our live chat here. Here's one. It says, what role do the politics of abortion play in contributing to the stridency and partisanship of gender feminism?
Oh yeah, I just remembered something I didn't answer from the prior person, and I'll combine them. They asked me what I think about the Fox program on the Phyllis Schlafly, and I'm actually reviewing it for the Washington Examiner. And so I've watched the whole thing, and I sort of love it because it's so beautifully, just sumptuously produced. And I was there in the last century and lived through it. And it's brilliantly acted. Kate Blanchett is such a good actress that even though clearly the director and nobody on that liked Phyllis Schlafly, they couldn't help but make her fascinating and human. And, but I think they made a lot of mistakes in the sort of educating young women on what actually happened with the ERA. The ERA was a minute away from passing. Everybody wanted it, especially Republicans. Richard Nixon wanted it. Jerry Ford, Dwight Eisenhower. It had been around for a long time. But the National Organization for Women and Gloria Steinem and not so much Betty Friedan, especially Gloria and her friends, they were going to use it to push things that nobody wanted. And Phyllis Schlafly figured that out. She had no opinion. And they did show this. I mean, she was interested in strategic defense and nuclear weapons and so forth. And she was invited to debate the ERA. And she said, I don't want to do that. I don't know what that is. I don't know. Maybe I'm for it. And then she read, and then she actually found like hardline gender feminism. And the big thing they wanted was total equality. They wanted a kind of androgyny, that men and women would be exactly the same. And it turned out that, so in this series, they act like Phyllis was lying, and that Schlafly was lying to tell women that they were going to draft their daughters. They did want to draft daughters. It's in the not the bylaws, but it was part of their mission. And actually, before I did this lecture, I went back. I was looking up the William F. Buckley program, and then I thought, oh, I'm going to go look at cross some old Fireline, and I found a debate between Phyllis Schlafly and a representative from now. I guess it was a feminist lawyer, and Bill Buckley is there, and you can see that he's not. I mean, of course, you assume he'll be on Schlafly's side, but he was very open, and he just said, well, it's just equality, and he had the attitude of a lot of conservative men. They're like, what could be wrong with that? And then this now lawyer just says, well, surely you're not going to want to draft women into combat. And then he waited for her to say, well, no. And she said, of course we will. And he said, but wait a minute, women don't want that. She said, that doesn't matter what they want. It matters what's fair. And then Schlafly was sitting there and says, you see, this is what, you can see right there, that's what they wanted. But this program makes it seem like she was exaggerating. The program also fails to make clear what some very good feminist historians and experts on the ERA have shown is that if they had, oh, what was that? Oh, that's a little late. It's my timer.
Oh,
It's really off. It happens all the time. I don't know what I'm doing with that. But anyway, my point is, I'll have to write about it. I'm just free associating. But great production and fun, but it just could have been better if they'd looked a little harder. You know what? It could have been better if there was more balance in the scholarship and the journalism on gender. Then the artists would have had richer material to work with. But all they kind of had was that she was a villain, and then they were the damsels in distress, and the ERA was brought down by these dark forces. The ERA was brought down by the radical feminists who wouldn't compromise. Anyway, the question about abortion, yes, well, that's been contentious. And the issue of abortion, it's a painful, fundamental moral dilemma. I've taught philosophy for many years, and we would do contemporary ethical issues. And I started out as a young assistant professor, very obviously pro-choice. I was very liberal. And then I read a number of philosophers, and some of them were, but they were not all Catholic intellectuals. They were just straightforward logicians, analytic philosophers looking at this and seeing that that what they would say is there should be compromise, that maybe we set a limit. At some point we are dealing with a human being. Reasonable people can differ. So I've always been pro-choice, but that it should be rare and that it is a tragedy, and to not regard it that way. It seems to me also, I mentioned earlier that a central principle of liberal humanism is pluralism, which means you agree to form a society and be a part of a society where you have to compromise. If you lose, but you want to keep the society together, you have to compromise. And that's what we have done on abortion. We have the right, but the government, it's not federally funded, and various states are always trying to limit the right. And some of the feminists will say, well, that's because of male supremacy. Well, first of all, men and women don't differ that much when it comes to their opinions about abortion. And the other thing is, these states that are trying to work in limitations and so forth, that's not evidence of male supremacy. It's evidence of a complex pluralistic democracy working out its differences. And the states will come out in different ways. We have the basic right. The Supreme Court gave us that, but there can be disagreement, and it comes from pluralism. It doesn't come from patriarchy. Anyway.
Thank you.
For our next question, what are your thoughts about the Me Too movement? Is it sort of intellectually consistent with the gender feminism as you talk about and identify it, or is it sort of its own thing that's just a popular movement? And how well do you think it's faring at the moment?
Well, I think it has a sort of an equity feminist dimension and a gender feminist dimension. As an equity feminist, I thought it was a good thing. There was just too much. Women were just, not all women, but most women were just tired of the office harasser or people just feeling free to say weird things, and all the time you had to put up with this. And I think I think the Harvey Weinstein case kind of shocked everyone that maybe and then people heard more stories and thought maybe we just better bring the workplace up to 21st century standards of civility and mutual respect. That I strongly support, and I think we're a better society for that. Where I draw the line is when people just went too far and started, accusing men of violating it for jokes or for just some kind of innocuous comment, and men had to become afraid around women. I don't want men to be afraid when they're with me. I want them to be, pick up cues and polite, reasonably polite, but we don't want people to be so, and I think we're creating a situation where men are going to be in the workplace afraid to be alone with a woman because he's just one complaint away from annihilation. Now, that's an overstatement, but not by much. There are men. There was it right away when the Me Too movement came. This one young woman posted a list accused. It was called the Shitty Men in Journalism list, anonymously sourced list of bad men in journalism, and some of them were bad men. I think maybe Harvey Weinstein was on the list. I can't remember, but he's not in journalism. But there, maybe a few of them were. Many of them were not. And then you looked at the charges, and they varied from. Some of them were accusing these men of rape, kidnapping, and horrible things, and then others would just say weird lunches or strange comments. And if you were on that list, these men were terrified, and some of them lost their jobs. And there's one guy who came. I have the podcast called The Femsplainers, and we brought him on, and it was heartbreaking what happened to him. So there, I don't recognize. I think the Me Too movement is fine when it's just about mutual respect and fairness. But what I don't like is to see it turn into a witch hunt against men. We saw like Aziz Ansari, the comedian, and then this blog posted. Someone posted this blog about how he behaved on a date, and then he was for a while under a cloud, and he was made miserable, like he might not work again, but mainly he was just humiliated. And I don't understand I don't understand feminism without compassion and mercy. This is feminism without mercy. Now you can be merciless towards criminals or serial predators, but not towards normal guys who might make mistakes. If they make mistakes, just tell them. Don't make a federal case out of it. But if women are trained in this sort of paranoid theory about the patriarchy, they have taught that every action is connected to another, so that if someone tells a joke that you find demeaning, or if they think it's connected to all these other crimes of the patriarchy, that they all are connected, and so they want to come down very hard on the first instance of someone that reinforces the patriarchal oppressive narrative or something. God. Anyway, too much of that. So that was a long-winded way of saying that I'm ambivalent about the Me Too movement. It did some good, but let's not turn it into a witch hunt.
Great. Thank you again. We had another question submitted that I was going to ask, and I just need to scroll up to it here. Here it is. Can you talk a little bit about the dynamic between your equity feminism as it relates to gender feminism and how those two tie into sort of the breakdown of the nuclear family that we've seen?
Well, I would just say that one thing about the style of feminism, equity feminism, that I endorse is that it tries to be evidence-based. And if you care about, and I do believe gender feminists care about women, I think they just have a distorted view of the world. If you care about women and children, the family and so forth, one of the things you find is that the nuclear family with an intact family is much safer for women and children than a broken family. A lot of the abuse of children and of women is connected to family disintegration, and where you have the mothers live in boyfriend and stepfathers and things like that. Now, that's not for everyone. I'm just telling you that the one thing we know is that this is protective. It's not perfect, but better than any other arrangement we know. Second thing is that, especially where boys are concerned, it just turns out that a culture of fatherlessness has taken a terrible toll on many boys. And at my research institute, the American Enterprise Institute, we've done some studies with other think tanks. We do this in the think tank world in DC. It doesn't seem to happen on campuses because there aren't that many conservatives on campus, but my think tank is largely conservatives and libertarians and a few Democrats, but there we are. And we do research with the Urban Institute and with Brookings over and over again. One of the most robust findings is that how much better children do when with two parents, and that a single parent family puts them at risk, and it especially puts boys at risk for academic failure. And apparently girls in a single do a little better. We know that most of the advantages of the civil rights movement, for example, have accrued to Black women and less to Black men in education. And one theory that people now are entertaining is that fatherlessness, as it becomes more common, and now it's across the culture. Initially, it was more in the Black family, then it moved, and now it's in the white families as well. It is not. Let me put it this way: there are all sorts of families, and in my family, there are, my family people there are single mothers and all of that, and people seem to be doing fine. That can happen, but a culture of fatherlessness, a culture of single parent families, it's unworkable. It's dysfunctional. And I think that equity feminism would be like in the universities. If it were in the think tanks of feminism, it's in the think tanks and, AEI and Brookings, but if it were in the feminist think tank, there would be more of an effort to have pro-family policies. And instead of it seems they're just either hostile or quiet about it. So I do think that radical feminism or gender feminism, it maybe it's not responsible, but it doesn't have even the language to talk about the importance of stabilizing marriage and families.
Thank you. I think we have time for one last question here before we have to close up. So I guess especially as we're hoping many of us to go back on campus and this will become something we maybe see again. What are your thoughts on single?
It'll just take a while.
I
feel bad for you. I feel so bad for you. Look, I have kids, and there's a college girl next door. I think in college, if I had to go home and live with my parents, would have been tough. Anyway, my heart goes out to you. You may be happy, but it would have been hard for me.
So with single-gendered organizations, especially at colleges where really students kind of are sort of up to their own devices to supervise things and make rules and abide by them and those sorts of things. Um, what are your thoughts on fraternities and sort of either feminist attacks on fraternities or reforms that should be made and those sorts of systems? And how should college students take a look at that?
Well, I wrote a book called The War Against Boys, and I think the war on fraternities is part of that war. Is there's just no tolerance for um, just male organizations. So you, on the one hand, you have feminism that really promotes the women's center. Here we have colleges that have majority female, but we get to have a women's center because women are oppressed. But the men who might want, most boys who want fraternities, they're just arriving on campus. I know this, both of my sons, one was at UPenn and one at Vanderbilt, and they joined fraternities because they just wanted to meet people and people to hang out with, and it was social. And I watched quite closely and have done some research, and it's true that there are some troglodytes and horrible things happen. I hate anything about the hazing, and it's primitive, but there should have been more understanding of how important this was to just for the friendships that were forged and what it meant to people. And but there were pressures, and by the time my kids were in them, they were much better than they had been in the old days. They needed to be reformed, but they were trying. But what happens is one person does a wrong thing and then everybody gets punished. And if you recall that case at University of Virginia where a fraternity was wrongly, falsely accused of a gang rape, and it was published in, oh God, now I'm blanking out on the magazine, Rolling Stone. Do you remember that, or were you probably in high school when this happened? Do you remember this case? They blamed this fraternity of this horrible, insane crime of gang rape. It was a complete fabrication. I don't know. She made it up. A girl named Jackie made it up. Rolling Stone published it, and then everybody believed it. And they were people like going around the campus they were throwing rocks through the windows of it was a complete fabrication, and they just used it as an excuse because they were just ready, so ready to pounce at this case. And I don't know. I don't know if the fraternities survived this, but people have been so ready to go after anything that it might be meaningful to young men. So I would be on the side fraternities, but that's the losing side. They're probably not going to survive. Women can have their groups, but their women's center, but God forbid men want to hang out with each other.
Great. So it's 1:28. If you're willing, we can ask one more question. We thought that was going to be our last.
I have nowhere to go. I'll stay here.
People do get Zoom fatigue, so that's why we try to keep it to an hour or so.
Yeah, I got Zoom fatigue, but because I was doing it too much with family members and friends, and then it was like, but I'll take another question or two.
I'm just finding one that I had earlier on here. Oh, here it is. So a counter argument that is often given towards third wave feminism is that women have privileges that men do not, such as in divorce courts, where women are more successful in obtaining custody of their children. However, this trend began as a result of the patriarchal view that women should take on all domestic roles. This gender role was also what kept women out of the workplace for many years throughout history. Rather than disregarding gender feminism because both sides have their own privileges, shouldn't we be instead working towards eliminating all of these inequalities instead? So that was more of a critical question. So I wanted to
no, it's a good one.
Yeah,
it's a good one because one thing I didn't say is that I think we should rid the colleges of the gender feminists. No, as someone who taught philosophy many years, what I believe is the truth. You're not going to get. We probably don't have the capacity, or maybe it's impossible in the case of some questions, to get the absolute truth. But we can make progress. We can be better. We can be more reasonable. And you need the collision of ideas, and the truth is sort of, we need the pushback, and to keep it, kind of, as I said before, sort of cancel out one another's biases and our confirmation bias and all of that, and our just various ways we practice self-deception. The easiest person to fool is yourself. I know that. And but my feminist colleagues should know that too. And so what this questioner is saying, well, the gender feminist could point out that it was patriarchy that created this, that makes the courts behave that way. I agree. And that's something that can be debated, could be brought, we should put some sunlight on it, because terrible things happen, shocking things can happen to men in these courts where they're devoted to their children, and then the mother can move out of state with the kids. And I have a, not an absolute, but when I was looking into this, I just thought that maybe joint custody should be the norm, and then move from there, rather than have it just choose which parent and then another. And that just seems so tragic for everyone. But anyway, to answer that question, I would like, I think that my thinking can be improved by hearing different voices, including from radical feminists. Sometimes I'll read them and think, God, maybe that's right. I almost see the world the way they do. And I find that beneficial. But mostly it's just strengthened my conviction that they're wrong, because when I see the world the way they do, I see the problems. But I'm sure they'll point out problems with the way that I think. But issues like family court, issues like contentious issues like abortion and work-family balance and all that would be enhanced by intellectual diversity. So I'm very grateful to the Buckley program for keeping that alive at Yale. Now, I could be wrong. You could be a model of just intellectual inclusivity in your departments. But if you are typical of other schools, just a lot of the things that I've said, are probably, or others, who are dissident from the radical perspective, when it comes to gender studies, you just don't hear from us. And there are a whole group of intellectuals who have pushed back. And yet, if you take a Camille Paglia or a Wendy Kaminer, Daphne Patai, there was a whole group of us who challenged what was happening in academic feminism and had a different view. There's a whole group of feminist lawyers, but who pushed back against what they thought were the more repressive policies coming from the Catherine McKinnon school of feminism. And they were not always, but not really able to get more people in the department that thought the way they were. They just became more and more isolated. I'm not sure now if they're being, in some departments, if in gender studies, if there are liberal feminists anymore. We just would be called backlashers or, dismissed as passé. But I'm not ready to be passé, and I hope, but I'm getting tired of it. Because I've been doing it for years. So what I'm doing now, I go around and give college lectures because I want to inspire younger women and men to challenge these issues and think about them. And there's a lot of work to be done. In whatever you're interested in, there's a gender dimension, and there's probably some mischief going on by radicals, and it needs to be corrected. So that's why I'm very happy with the Buckley program.
Great. Well, on that great call to action note, thank you on behalf of the Buckley program, Dr. Sommers, for joining us this afternoon. It was a very enlightening talk, and I know I speak for everyone when I say we certainly learned a lot and appreciate your perspective. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, and thank you to everyone who attended online. We tried to get to as many questions as we could. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.